I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker, Congressman Kilmer. He's a U.S. representative for Washington's 6th District, that's the Olympic Peninsula, and just a little bit of a Tacoma. He was elected as a congressman earlier this year after winning an election in which he announced his candidacy in March 2012. He ran to replace longtime Congressman Norm Dix. A Washington native, Kilmer was born and raised on the Olympic Peninsula. Fast forward a few years, and Kilmer received a certificate in American Studies and a BA in Public Affairs from Princeton University. Continuing his education, Kilmer went on to earn a master's degree in Economic Development Policy and a PhD in Comparative Social Policy and Intervention from the University of Oxford. Kilmer began his political career in 2005 when he was elected to the Washington House of Representatives. After a term there, Kilmer was elected to the Washington Senate, where he served from 2007 to 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, your keynote speaker, Congressman Kilmer.
Hello, everybody. Well, so Tyler said I got about 20 minutes to talk, and then I'm going to take some questions. Looking at this room, I think this is going to be one of the easiest speaking engagements I have had, because it's a room full of politically interested and engaged young people. I will tell you the hardest speaking engagement I've ever had. It was Veterans Day a few years back at South Colby Elementary School. I was their Veterans Day speaker, and I was given the task of speaking to them preschool through 5th grade, 20 minutes. And I went into the gymnasium, and it was filled preschool through 5th grade, 20 minutes. And I went up to one of the teachers and said, I'm screwed. What am I going to do? And she gave me the best advice I've ever had in my entire time in public service. She said, Derek, here's the deal. Say whatever it is you got to say. Say it in whatever amount of time you got to say it in. But if you see the kids start picking their noses, wrap it up. Those are just good words to live by. So I'm going to try to keep it to about 20 minutes, but if you're feeling like I'm running a little long, you know what to do. Tyler suggested that I take a little time to provide a little bit of inspiration. I know these days, when you think inspiration, you think Congress. I will tell you, it is very strange as a new member of Congress joining an organization that, according to a recent poll by Pew, is held in lower regard than head lice and colonoscopies. Congress ranked just slightly above cockroaches. I was like, take that, cockroaches. And I'll tell you, having been there for about 11 months, I've got a pretty good sense of why that is so. I want to just take a few minutes and kind of give you the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's going on back there, and then give you some direction on how I think we ought to fix it. But I'll start by giving a little bit of background on how I got into all this stuff. I grew up in Port Angeles. Any Port Angelinos in there? No. Clallam County at all? No. No one's represented. And then when I was going through high school, it was right around the time the timber industry took it on the chin. I saw a lot of my friends' parents lose their jobs, a lot of my neighbors lose their jobs. It had a huge impact on me, so much so that I went off to college and graduate school and studied public policy with a focus on economic development, basically looking at how do we get people back to work. And then worked professionally for about 10 years in economic development. And I actually, even though I participated in JSA when I was in high school, I never thought I'd run for office. I was just working in economic development, and I met with about 200 businesses a year, and I'd have people talk about what government was doing and what it wasn't doing, and I found myself feeling grumpy about it. And finally, some of the folks I worked with said, you seem to have a lot of good ideas, and you sure as heck complain enough, why don't you go do something about it? And the next thing I knew, I was running for the state legislature. And while I was in the state legislature, I worked mostly on economic development issues, focused a lot on education issues, and then was also one of our budget writers. And it was March 3rd, 2012, when I was actually sitting in the governor's prayer breakfast down in Olympia. and my phone rang, and I punted it to voicemail. And then it rang again. It was a 202 area code, and I punted it to voicemail again. And then it rang again, and I thought, something is wrong in our nation's capital. I have got to take this call. So I walked out, and it was actually my congressman, Norm Dix, who's been my congressman since I was 2. And he said, hey, Derek, in about an hour, I'm going to announce my retirement, and you should figure out what you're going to do. And after I regained consciousness, I walked back into the prayer breakfast. I had a greater mission of prayer. And later that night, I called my wife and I said, sweetheart, we got to go out to dinner and talk about what we're going to do here. And we're nerds, so we like wrote out the pros and the cons, you know, like you do. I'll tell you the top of the pro list, I'll tell you the top of the con list. Top of the pro list was easy. I feel like we got to get people back to work. And that's what I spent my professional career working on. It's what I focused my academic efforts on. And it's what I worked on in the state legislature. Top of the con list was 2 things. First, I have 2 little kids. I've got a 4-year-old named Tess and a 7-year-old named Sophie. And there was some acknowledgement that if I was successful in this undertaking, I was signing up for a 3,000-mile commute. The other thing on the con list was, I think Congress is a total mess. I don't think you have to watch C-SPAN or read the Washington Post to have a sense that it's not really working right now. I think we're in trouble when either party is defining success as making the other guys look stupid. And so, as my wife and I sat there at this Indian restaurant in Gig Harbor, I kept coming back to the top of the con list. And at some point I said, maybe those 2 things are the reasons to do this. It's a total mess back there, and we have 2 little kids, and I actually worry about what kind of country our kids grow up in. And so we decided to get in the game, and it was officially the most challenging job interview process of my life. And it's been certainly an interesting transition, particularly in light of the partisan bickering that you see. The theme of your conference is progressing beyond partisanship, from conflict to compromise. I want to talk about that for a second, because I think it's really, really important. I wish I could tell you that I believe that there's a silver bullet to actually moving beyond partisanship. I don't believe that. I think it's more like silver buckshot. I think there's a lot of things we got to do to move beyond partisanship, and I want to just talk about a few of them. I'm going to start by relating one of the conversations I had when I was first elected to the state legislature. I got a call from this guy named Tom Swayze, who was a Republican. I'm a Democrat. There was a Republican who had represented my community in the state legislature. He had actually been the Republican majority leader of our state house, a guy named Tom Swayze. He and I went to church together, and we were in a Rotary Club together. And after I got elected, he gave me a call, and he said, Derek, I want to go grab coffee with you and give you some advice. And as we sat there, he gave me 2 suggestions, which I think are actually pretty relevant in our politics these days. First, he said, vote what you think is right. He said there's Democrats with good ideas and some with stupid ideas. And there are Republicans with stupid ideas and some with good ideas. Vote for the good ones. Vote against the stupid ones. That does not sound like rocket science. But unfortunately, too often, it's missing in our politics today. You could have Democrats proclaim that December 25th shall be known as Christmas, and you'll get a good chunk of Republicans who will vote against it. You could have Republicans propose that January 1st now be called New Year's, and you'll get a good chunk of Democrats who will vote against it. You know, that's broken. We have got to get beyond that. The second piece of advice that Tom Swayze gave me was, whatever you work on, you should at least try to work together on those things. Because you will solve problems better when you solve problems together. That's sometimes very, very hard. And I'll share a story with you. 2 weeks into the job, when I got into Congress, we had a group that went out to the Pentagon. And we met with then Secretary Panetta and a bunch of the military brass. And then we took a bus back to the Capitol. And it was in the evening, and just as we got back to the Capitol, I stood up on the bus and said, hey, I found this really good burger joint about like 4 blocks from here, and I'm gonna go get burgers. If anyone wants to come with me, I invite you to come with me, because I'm a social eater. And we're sitting at this burger joint. I have 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. About 45 minutes into the dinner, I said something along the lines of, it seems like we ought to be able to get our stuff together and actually get some stuff done. Guy sitting across the table from me was a Republican from the Midwest. And he said, Derek, I like you. He said, in fact, when we went through freshman orientation together, you struck me as a guy I kind of like. And he said, but here's what you need to understand. He said, I got elected. This was a Republican freshman. He said, I got elected by defeating a Republican incumbent. And I ran against him as not being conservative enough. He said, the first vote I cast when I got here was a vote against John Boehner for Speaker. And I sent out a press release after that vote saying I voted against John Boehner because he's too compromising. He said, Derek, I like you, but I have very little political interest in compromising with you or any other Democrat. And I walked out of that restaurant and I called my wife and I said, sweetheart, I have 2 reactions to this. 1, how incredibly forthcoming. And 2, oh my God. Because, we're in trouble if that's the tenor of things. Now here's the good news. That member of Congress and I have actually worked together on sponsoring 2 bills together. I made a very conscious effort that part of the way we're going to fix this is by trying to break down some of those walls that often, as a result of the D or the R next to our names, keep us from working together. In fact, if you came out to Washington, D.C. on an average Wednesday, you would find me at a breakfast meeting of a group called the Bipartisan Working Group. And it's a group of Democrats and Republicans, most all of whom check their snarky talking points at the door, and we sit around a table and we try to figure out how we can work together on some stuff. We talk about what we're working on and how we might be able to work on those issues together. And then we bring in an outside speaker to talk about a challenge facing our country and how we might be able to tackle that challenge together. Don't get me wrong. It's not like we sit around the table and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, which sounds like fun. But at least we are trying to work together. And I think that's, as we look at progressing beyond partisanship, that's something that you should expect, you should demand from your elected officials. Second, in terms of things that I think can get us beyond partisanship, I think we need to get some rules of the game and have our elected officials follow those rules. So let me use an example here, and the best example is the budget. When I went through freshman orientation as a new member of Congress, we had a presentation on the budget. It was like something out of your high school civics class, right? House passes a budget, then the Senate passes a budget. And then they go to conference committee to work out their differences. Then the House passes spending or appropriations bills, and the Senate passes appropriations bills, and then they go to conference committee to work out their differences. And after about 20 minutes of this guy explaining the process, he said, but that hasn't happened in years. And it's why you've seen what you've seen out of Congress. It's been since 2009 that Congress has actually passed a budget. And instead you've seen, you've gone beyond a fiscal cliff. You're at like a fiscal mountain range, where Congress continues to kick the can down the road, and you've had government shutdowns, and you've seen our nation's credit rating downgraded. And we've got to actually have some rules of the game and actually have our elected officials follow those rules. So that's another thing that I think, if we're going to progress beyond partisanship, we've got to do. Third, nature abhors a vacuum. And I think it's very important that we re-empower citizens. And it's why it's so important that you're all here. You're all very unusual that you're here. On a set, like when I was in high school, I would be like watching football right now. But I commend you for that. And as we look at our democracy right now, we've got to move from having citizens sitting on the sidelines to having citizens re-engage. in part because when that vacuum exists, we know what goes into that vacuum. And it's special interests, right? I mean, you see all, I don't know about the rest of you, but come election time, I'm ready to throw my TV set out the window because of all these ads and, funded by, people for a better world tomorrow or, these various groups that you don't even know where they come from. And to me, that suggests a few things that we need to change. One, I actually believe we need campaign finance reform. I would support citizen-financed elections, public financing of our campaigns, so that citizens are actually engaged more than special interests. I also think things have gotten worse because of the Supreme Court decision known as Citizens United. I don't think money is speech, and I don't think corporations are people. And I think if the United States Supreme Court believes that that is so, then I think we should amend the Constitution. And we should fix that. Part of the way we re-empower citizens is expecting your elected officials to actually be available and accountable to you. Since I've been in office, I've done 10 in-person town halls in my district. And which, is a little odd, right? Because people don't really do town halls that much anymore. And let me explain why I do. And the best way I can explain it is by relating an experience I had with my 7-year-old. I had one week where I did 7 town hall meetings. And one morning, before I headed to one of my town halls, I was having breakfast with my 4-year-old Tess and my 7-year-old Sophie. And I said, guys, I gotta go. And my 7-year-old said, why? And I said, well, I gotta go to one of my town hall meetings. And she said, why? And I said, well, I gotta go tell people what I've been working on and answer their questions. And she said, good. That's right. She said, why? And I said, well, sweetheart, you remember we live in a democracy, right? And she went, yeah. And I said, well, who's in charge of democracy? And she went, the people. And I said, that's right. So who am I going to go meet with? And she went, the people. And I said, that's right. And then she said, wait a minute. And I said, what? She said, I'm the people. And I said, that's true, you are a person. And she said, so does that mean you work for me? And I said, well, kind of. And then she said, well then, Dad, give me candy. Which I believe in a nutshell explains the problem with the federal budget. But I do believe that you have to have citizens engaged and involved. And one of the ways you do that is expect and demand that your elected officials be accessible and available and accountable to we the people. The final thing I want to say, and then I want to take your questions, is keep the faith. It's very easy. I mean, how many of you are dissatisfied with what you see out of your federal government right now? Yeah, me too. And those who don't have your hands in the air, what's wrong with you? But, it's funny. I was at the Armed Forces Day dinner in Bremerton a few months back, and I was meeting with a guy from the Navy, and he said, how's it going back there? And I said, dude, it's a fixer-upper. I said, sometimes it feels like turned in a battleship. And he said, Derek, I actually captained a battleship, which is awesome. And he said, here's the deal. Targeted and strategic course correction over time can make a really big difference. And it's easy to look at our democracy right now and think, man, this battleship's headed for the rocks. But particularly for those of you in this room who are getting engaged and getting involved, you actually have the power to turn that battleship by making that targeted and strategic course correction over time. And that's important. And I say that as someone who is a representative, but more importantly as a dad who wants to see a better future for my kids. Where they can get a great education. Where we embrace an ethic that Benjamin Franklin wrote 2.5 centuries ago, that an investment in knowledge pays the greatest dividends. Where they can grow up and get a great job that pays a good wage and provides good benefits. Where they're respected as working people. I want that future for my kids, where we actually protect the planet for them. because our kids are only as safe as the air they breathe and the water they drink and the earth we pass on to them. I want that future for them. I want them to grow up in a world where discrimination is a thing of the past, where regardless of your race or your religion or your gender or your orientation or whatever, you're a valued and appreciated member of our community. I want that future for them. And the only way we make that happen is by having the faith that we can make that happen, and by being involved and being engaged. There's a lot of ways to do that. I guess I'll just end by saying why that's so important. You know, the only thing I remember from my college anthropology class, the only thing I remember, is something they asked Margaret Mead. They asked Margaret Mead, when you're looking at an ancient civilization, or how do you know you've come across a civilized society rather than just random wanderers? And her response was very interesting. They said, you know, is it some tool or instrument or article of clothing? And her response was, you know you found a civilized society when you find a healed femur bone, a thigh bone. And as she explained it, in ancient times, if you broke your femur, you were pretty cooked. You know, you couldn't hunt or gather or fish or flee from danger. And most importantly, you couldn't fix it on your own. You actually had to have someone care enough about you to help you heal. You know, when we are at a place in our society and in our economy and in our politics where we've got a lot of broken femurs, you know, and not everyone can fix them on their own. And so part of the test of us is whether we have each other's back. You know, so my challenge to you and my encouragement to you is to stay involved, whether that be running for office or getting involved in a campaign or coming up with a new innovative product that can change the world, or being a doctor, or doing whatever. Make a difference in your community. Make a difference in our politics. You know, actually step up to the line it says on the sign in front of this podium. Be the people, because we need you. All right? Thank you.